Happy Monday. Let's continue on with Alice in Wonderland. And it begins. Curious, sir, and curiouser, cried Alice. She was so much surprised that for a moment she forgot quite how to speak good English. Now I'm opening up like the largest telescope that ever was. Goodbye, feet. For when she looked down at her feet, they almost seemed to be out of sight, they were getting so far off. Oh, my poor little feet. I wonder who will put on your shoes and stockings for you now. I'm sure I shan't be able. I shall be a great deal too far off to trouble myself about you. You must manage the best way you can. But I must be kind to them, thought Alice, or perhaps they won't walk the way I want to go. Let me see. I will give them a new pair of boots at Christmas. And she went on planning to herself how she would manage it. They must go by the carrier, she thought, and how funny it will seem sending presents to one's own feet, and how odd the directions will look. Alice's right foot, Esquire, hearthrug near the fender, with Alice's love. Oh, what nonsense I'm talking. Just at this moment her head struck against the roof of the hall. In fact, she was now rather more than 9 feet high, and she looked up at once at the little golden key and hurried off to the garden door. Poor Alice! It was as much as she could do, lying down on the one side, to look through the garden with one eye. But to get through was more hopeless than ever. She sat down and began to cry. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, said Alice. A great girl like you, she might as well say this, to go on crying in this way. Stop this moment, I tell you. But she went on all the same, shedding gallons of tears, until there was a large, deep pool all around her, about 4 inches deep and reaching half down the hall. After a time she heard a little pattering of feet in the distance, and she hastily dried her eyes to see what was coming. It was the White Rabbit, with a pair of white kid gloves in one hand and a large fan in the other. He came trotting along in a great hurry, muttering to himself as he came, "Oh, the Duchess! Oh, the Duchess! Oh, she won't be savage if I've kept her waiting." Alice felt so desperate she was ready to ask for any help, so, when the rabbit came near her, she began in a low, timid voice, "If you please, sir." The rabbit started violently, and dropped the white kid gloves in the fan, and scurried away into the darkness as hard as he could go. Alice took up the fan and gloves. As the hall was very hot, she kept fanning herself all the time she went on talking. Oh dear, how weird everything is today, and yesterday things went on just as usual. I wonder if I might have been changed in the night. Let me think. I was the same when I got up this morning. I almost think I can remember feeling a little different. But if I'm not the same, the next question is, who in the world am I? Ah, that is the great puzzle. And she began thinking all over the children she knew that were the same age as herself, to see if she could have been changed for any of them. I'm not Ada, she said, for her hair goes in such long ringlets, and mine does not go in ringlets at all. And I'm sure I can't be Mabel, for I know all sorts of things, and she knows very little. Besides, she's a she, and I am an I. Oh dear, how puzzling it all is. I'll try to see if I know all the things I used to. Let me see. 4 times 5 is 12. 4 times 6 is 13. And 4 times 7 is... Oh dear, I shall never get to 20 at this rate. However, the multiplication table doesn't signify. Let's try geography. London is the capital of Paris. Paris is the capital of Rome. And Rome... Oh no, that's all wrong. I'm certain I must have been changed for Mabel. I will try and say, how doth the... And she crossed her hands on her lap as if she were saying lessons, and began to repeat it, but her voice sounded hoarse and strange, and the words did not come out the same as they used to. How doth the little crocodile improve his shining tail, and pour the waters of the Nile over every golden scale? How cheerfully he seems to grin, how neatly he spreads his claws, and welcomes little fishes with gently smiling jaws. I'm sure those are not the right words, said poor Alice, and her eyes began to fill with tears again as she went on. I must be Mabel after all, and I shall have to go and live in that poky little house, and have next to no toys to play with, and ever so many lessons to learn. No, I've made up my mind. If I am Mabel, I will stay down here. I will be no use to their putting their heads down and saying, "Come up again, dear." I shall only look up and say, 'Who am I then?' Tell me that first, and if I like being that person, I will come up. If not, I'll stay down here until I'm somebody else's. But, oh dear!" cried Alice, with a sudden burst of tears. "I do wish they would put their heads down. I'm so very tired of being all alone." As she said this, she looked down at her hands and was surprised to see she had put on one of the rabbit's little white kid gloves while she was talking. "How can I have done that?" she thought. "I must be growing small again." She got up and went to the table to measure herself, but found that as nearly as she could guess, she was now about 2 feet high, and was going on shrinking rapidly. She found out the cause of this was the fan she was holding, and she dropped it hastily, just in time to save herself from shrinking away altogether. "That was a narrow escape," said Alice, a good deal frightened at the sudden change, but very glad to find herself still in existence. "And now, on to the garden." And she ran back with all speed to the little door, but alas, the little door was shut again, and the golden key was lying on the glass table as before. "And things are worse than ever," thought the poor child, "for I was never so small as this before, and I declare it's too bad that this is." As she said these words, her foot slipped, and in another moment, splash, she was up to her chin in salt water. Her first idea was that she had somehow fallen into the sea, and in that case I can go back by railway. She said to herself. Alice had been to the seaside once in her life, and had come to the general conclusion that wherever you go on the English coast you will find a number of bathing machines in the sea, and some children digging in the sand with wooden spades, and then a row of lodging-houses, and behind them a railway station. However, she soon made out she was in the pool of tears which she had wept when she was 9 feet high. "I wish I hadn't cried so much," said Alice, as she swam about trying to find her way out. "I shall be punished for it now, I suppose, by being drowned in my own tears. That will be a weird thing for sure. However, everything is so weird today." Just then she heard something splashing about in the pool a little way off, and she swam nearer to make out what it was. At first she thought it might be a walrus or a hippopotamus, but then she remembered how small she was now, and she soon made out it was only a mouse that had slipped in like herself. "Would it be of any use now," thought Alice, "to speak to the mouse? Everything is so out of the way down here, and I could think it very likely that it can talk, at any race. So there's no harm trying. So she began. "Oh, mouse, do you know how to get away out of this pool? I'm very tired of swimming about in here. Oh, mouse." Alice thought this must be the right way of speaking to a mouse. She had never done such a thing before, but she remembered having seen her brother's Latin grammar. A mouse, of a mouse, to a mouse, oh mouse. The mouse looked at her rather inquisitively, but seemed to wink at her with one of its little eyes, but said nothing. "Perhaps it doesn't understand English," thought Alice. "I dare say it's a French mouse, came over with William the Conqueror." With all of her knowledge of history, Alice had no very clear notion of how long ago anything had happened. So she began again. "Où est ma chatte?" which is the first sentence in her French lesson book. The mouse gave a sudden leap out of the water, and seemed to quiver all over with fright. "Oh, I beg your pardon," cried Alice, hastily, afraid she had hurt the poor animal's feelings. "I quite forgot you didn't like cats." "Not like cats!" cried the mouse, in a shrill, passionate voice. "Would you like cats if you were me?" "Well, perhaps not," said Alice in a soothing tone, "but do not be angry about it. And yet I wish to show you our cat, Dana. I think you'd take to a fancy to cats, if only you could see her. She's such a dear quiet thing," Alice went on, half to herself as she swam lazily about in the pool. "And she sits purring so nicely by the fire, licking her paws and washing her face. She's such a soft thing to nurse, and she's a capital thing for catching mice." "Oh, I beg your pardon," cried Alice again, for this time the mouse was bristling all over, and she felt certain it must be offended. "We won't certainly talk about her any more if you'd rather not." "We indeed," cried Mouse, who was trembling down to the end of his tail, "as if I would talk on such a subject. Our family has always hated cats. Nasty, low, vulgar things. Don't let me hear the name again. I won't, indeed." said Alice, in a great hurry to change the subject of conversation. Are you fond of dogs? Most did not answer, so Alice went on eagerly. There's such a nice little dog near our house. I should like to show you. A little bright-eyed terrier with, such curly long brown hair. And it'll fetch things when you throw them, and it sits up and begs for dinner, and all sorts of things, and I can't remember half of them. And it belongs to the farmer. You know, and he says it's so useful. It's worth £100. He says it kills all the rats and, oh dear, cried Alice in a sorrowful tone. I'm afraid I've offended you again, for Mouse was swimming away from her, as hard as it could go, making quite the commotion in the pool as it went. So she called after it, Mouse dear, do come back again, and we won't talk about cats, or dogs either, if you don't like them. When Mouse heard this, he turned around and swam slowly back to her. Its face was quite pale, with a passion, Alice thought. It said in a low, trembling voice, Let us get to the shore, and I will tell you my history, and you will understand why I hate cats and dogs. And it was high time for the pool to go, for the pool was getting quite crowded with the birds and animals that had fallen into it. There was a duck and a dodo and a lory and an eaglet and several very other curious creatures. Alice led the way, and the whole party swam to shore. The end of chapter 2.